各位
Members, welcome to the Public Works Subcommittee meeting. This is an open meeting. We think that it will end at 10:30. It's a briefing on estimation of project cost. The administration will give us a presentation on the approach and methodology for the estimation of project cost for public works projects. We have with us Deputy Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, Mr. Yang Tak Kung, Deputy Secretary for Development Works 2, Mr. Enoch Lam, Chief Assistant Secretary for Development Works 1, Mr. John Kwong, Senior Economist of Financial Secretary's Office, Mr. Eric Lee, Principal Assistant Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury Works, Ms. Joyce Ho. The administration gave us an information paper on estimation of project cost, paper number PWSCI 2013-14, number 10. Is for members' reference. I first will ask Mr. Kwong, Chief Assistant Secretary for Development Works 1, to give us a presentation. There is a PowerPoint presentation. I think it will take about 5 to 10 minutes. Chairman, members, good morning. In response to what was proposed on the 24th of June 2013, we give members a briefing on the estimation on project cost. Generally speaking, the project cost for public works projects are made up of 3 parts, and you see that on PWSC papers. The first one is base estimate, the second, project contingency, and the third, provision for price adjustment. When the administration applies for funding approval from the LegCo, it will set out the estimated project cost on paper. As you can see, those circled in red. The project costs include base estimate, project contingency, and provision for price adjustments. And the one circled in green is the money of the day prices and also the constant prices. And I'll go into detail one by one. First, basic estimate. They include construction cost of labor, plant, materials, design, etc. And there is also the cost of consultants as well, and site supervision cost of resident site staff. When we estimate basic cost, we will take into account tender prices of recently awarded contracts of similar nature and unit rates of similar types of work, with adjustments given to the nature, uniqueness, difficulty, and complexity of the project and relevant tender price index, labor wages, and material cost indices. And in terms of design and management fees as well as site supervision cost, we prepare the estimation based on the estimated manpower required and the salary level of the relevant staff. Apart from basic estimate, we will also set aside project contingency to take into account additional costs caused by unforeseen circumstances. We assess the risk and estimate the required contingency for a project, and it's usually about 10% of the project cost. Based on past experience, the 10% of project cost is sufficient to cover the additional costs. When we talk about unforeseen circumstances, there are 3 major categories. First, higher than expected tender price. Sometimes contractors may make adjustments and on the cost as a result of complexities of groundwork. They are usually more conservative than us, and they will put in place a premium that is quite high. Another unforeseen circumstance is unexpected ground conditions, and the third category are additional works to meet local concerns, possible claims, and changes. Basic estimate plus project contingency equals to constant prices. We will put in place a provision for price adjustments to cater for movement in the cost of labor and material during the contract period. We will adopt price adjustment factors derived from the government's latest set of assumptions on the trend rate of change in the prices of public sector building and construction output, and convert the cost of estimate from constant prices into money of the day prices, MOD. The difference between MOD prices and the constant prices will be the provision for price adjustments to be included. Let me give you an example to illustrate the calculation of the provision for price adjustments. In short, we take into account the estimate cash flow of the financial year and then take into account the various factors to work out the money of the day prices. The difference between the constant prices and the MOD prices is the provision for price adjustments. I'd like to draw your attention that for different types of work there will be a different cash flow. So even with constant prices and the same constant prices and same project period, there may be a difference in provision for price adjustments. And I'd also like to point out to you that the adjustments given to us by the government economists is just for the short term. And since there are fluctuations, such may not be very accurate. Say, for example, in 2010 March, it was estimated the adjustment factor is about 4, but it turned out to be 6.3%, which is 1.5 times higher than the original estimate. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you, Mr. Kwong. Now I open the floor for members to ask questions. Would you please press, if you wish to speak, press the press to speak button. We have 4 members: Mr. Christopher Cheung, Wong Kok King, Emily Lau, and Tam Niu Chung. Anyone else? Please give us an early indication so that we can take that into account. And Dr. Fernando Zheng. No one else. So for the first round, 5 minutes question and answer. First, Mr. Christopher Cheung. Thank you. I see that in your presentation at the outset, you will take into account recent tender prices, complexity of the works, and a risk premium. So it's rather comprehensive. Why is there a need for the adjustment factor? Because you have already obtained the latest set of figures, and then you put in place a provision for price adjustments. So you put in place a safeguard of 200 to 300%. And the private sector will take the price level of the public sector into account, and as a result, prices always increase. Is it the case that in past projects, every time the original estimate is lower than the actual cost? And how many % of the projects result in a surplus? And does the surplus goes to the treasury or what? Who is to take this question? Mr. Enoch Lam. I thank the member for the question. The member was right. Based on past experience and past similar projects, we conduct assessments. And I'd like to say that these are just estimates. Say, for example, in 2009, there was a project estimate. And something happened in the meantime, and in the basic estimate, you may notice that there are 3 parts. Some for material, some for wages, some for plant. There may be changes that was not foreseen when the estimate was done in 2009. Yes, that happens. And is it a common occurrence? Well, over a year, we have about 10 projects. And the actual cost in the end exceed the original estimate happens. Say, for example, for 2008, the price for metal has risen drastically, and it was not foreseen. So there is a difference between the actual cost and our original estimate. And as a result, we have to ask for additional funding approval from the LetGo. And such cases are few in number. And in my PowerPoint presentation, we mentioned risk assessment. Say, for example, if there is work done on a slope, there was the original estimate, the contractor may make their own calculation of risk. And there are a number of projects resulting in a surplus. When the project is completed, we will work out the final figure with the contractor. The surplus will go into the public coffer. And that is the general practice. Well, if the project takes 2 to 3 years, and there are already many types of safeguards in the original estimate, I know that there will be unforeseen circumstances, but is there any mechanism that set the price to take into account prices of changing prices of material, say, for example, to purchase material in advance, to pay a deposit so as to get some certainty on material cost. Mr. Lam, no matter how we estimate the prices, whether the change is upward or downward, we will have to absorb that. Say, when it's a piling work, the ground condition is very complex or very simple. All these risks have been taken into account. If the contractor knows that the contractor cannot foresee what will happen, whether it's an increase or decrease, so they will have to build in a risk premium. And one of the factors is deflation or inflation. The best approach is to share out the risks. If we shift all the risks to the contractor will will build that into the cost, and in the end paid by the government. We have a price adjustment provision. We've taken reference from overseas practice, and this is the most cost-effective.
Next one, Wong Kwok Heng. Thank you, Chairman. 2 questions for the government. First is, over the past year, how many construction works exceeded their costs? And what was the total amount of exceeding costs? What's the maximum amount of exceeding costs and the minimum amount? Can you provide us with that information for the past year? That's the situation of exceeding costs. And just then I heard from the secretary that there's a 10% contingency costs and provisions for price adjustment. So you are actually preparing for the worst. Of course, there are unexpected costs incurred. But lately, there was a report that RTHK is building a new complex, and its original cost is $1.6 billion of construction cost. But now, according to the report, the cost will go up to more than $6 billion. This is really out of proportion. So I'd like to ask, what are the reasons for that? Why is the cost risen from 1.6 billion to more than 6 billion? Such a heavy increase in cost. This is something very surprising to me. I'd like the administration to explain to me why this is the case. Is it unreasonable? Mr. Lam? Thank you, Mr. Wong. On your second question first, may I ask my colleague to answer the first question later? If we don't have enough data, we can provide you in writing later on. On the other question, in our estimates, we do have contingency costs and provisions for price adjustment. For the project contingencies, it applies when there is a project and our staff would assess the risks involved. It is quite complicated indeed, because there could be technical risks, and there could be costs incurred from accidents. And all these assessments are professional judgments. So after the assessment is done, we would translate the figures involved into a certain amount. Based on our past experience, the contingency will normally make up 10% of the construction costs. Chairman, I'm not challenging contingency costs nor the provisions. I was asking, why is it that the RTHK's costs go up so much? Yeah, could you answer the core question, please? Yes, the RTHK project does not come under Development Bureau, but my understanding is that the project involved has a project scope. And according to that scope, an estimate was made. But several years later, it could be that in the project scope, there are some changes. In other words, maybe initially, the scope of facilities involved may have been changed. And this is something that always happens in a construction project. For example, earlier on, we might have a rough estimate of what facilities will be there, what will be added later on, a rough estimate. But after various rounds of consultations, studies, it could be found that the original scope is not adequate, and there may be new items added to the scope, and that will lead to an increase in the cost. So this is unrelated to contingency costs or provisions. So that's my understanding, of what could happen. So for this particular item, the cost could be increased because of this reason. But if the project scope has already been finalized and budget has been obtained, and if the costs exceed original estimates, then that could be another case. Well, if there are serious costs, exceeding costs, then I think the government department is obliged to explain to the electrical and the public why. Otherwise, the public would think that we are just, spending beyond our means. Yet, I think Mr. Lam just mentioned the usual procedures. As for the planning of RTHK, actually yesterday's Information and Broadcast Committee already heard an explanation. I think back to his first question, I think people might be still very concerned about the data of project overspending. Yes, Chairman, from the information we've got over the past decade, LegCo approved 630 odd projects. Among them, projects that require LegCo for approval for exceeding costs numbered 34. As for other concrete data, we need to collect them and provide you with them after the meeting. Okay, next one is Emily Lau. Chairman, I'm sure the administration knows that when a project exceeds the cost, it's really something major. So out of the 600-something projects, we heard that more than 30 exceeded the cost. But I hope that you can do more accurate estimates. Don't think that it's easy to get approval for increased budget from LegCo. We would not stop you from carrying out your projects. I do hope that you can work out the estimates on a basis of a fair, professional basis. But for RTHK, they may have come up with a rough estimate in the early days, and then they increased the cost several times, and then you said, well, that's fine because things have changed. But I don't know what your actual requirements are. Let's not talk about other bureaus, but your bureau. Would you actually require a client to give you a clear estimate first and not let them increase the estimates anytime later? And Chairman, there's also a concern that things are known to be moving very slowly. Is it that the process involved is so complicated? Therefore, even building a street would take several years? What's the problem there? And also for the tendering process, do you always give the tender to the lowest bidder? But sometimes if you give the tender to the lowest bidder, quality might be compromised. Yesterday there was another meeting where the Construction Industry Council was present. I asked the council about their manpower supply because we heard that projects were delayed because of lack of manpower. Would that be a reason behind rising costs too? Okay, several questions. Well, Chairman, I'm sure they've taken down my questions. Okay, thank you, member. Exceeding costs is something major. When our department is aware of a chance of exceeding costs, we would, should the work has already begun, we would talk with the contractor on the chances of reducing the chances of exceeding costs. And actually, for all the projects submitted to LegCo, well, some ultimately did not make it to LegCo because of the work done on our part. But we will continue to, as you said, try to enhance or look into how to enhance our professional judgment. We'll also see what we can do to, during the process of assessing prices or cost of materials. But please understand, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see how things may change in the future. But as for the procedures involved, we do want to expedite the entire process. Now, as you all know, many construction projects are from those beyond the statutory required period. There are also time involved in carrying out consultations. So we hope that before a project gets started, we want to actually finish all the consultations. And I know that we don't want to have consultations that last too long. As for extending tenders to the lowest bidders, in fact, I want to make 2 points. One, we don't just look at prices alone, the bidding cost alone. We will also look at a tenderer's past performance. And often, we also require a bidder to submit a technical assessment. We give marks to each bidder's performance in the technical assessment. So sometimes you can see that we don't necessarily just offer a tender to the lowest bidders. If we give a project to too low a bidder, or the bidding price is too low, we have the right to review it Recently, we have looked at whether contractors, when they gave us a bidding price, if we found that the price seems unreasonable, we might actually try to give a mark to it, and we try to make sure that more reasonable prices are submitted. I'm sure you've also heard about our measures adopted. But so simply put, basically, since 2010, we have put priority to human resources to try to attract more people into the construction industry, and also so that we have more better skilled workers in the industry. Okay, for the last question, tomorrow's sitting would actually, I'm sure, will hear more members say or comment on the topic. Next one is Tam Yu Chung. Yes, just then you talk about the consultancy course include design and management. Consultancies or consultants don't seem to be an accurate term for that, because design and construction seems different. In the past, our concept of consultants are, private consultants hired to oversee a project. So it seems like, that's a different concept to me. So I'm not quite clear what you actually meant. Could you explain that to us, please? And secondly, the point about more than 600 projects, of which more than 30 exceeded their costs. Of that 30-odd projects, were they projects involving a large amount of money? Do you have that kind of figure? There are reports today that the bypass in Central also exceeded costs by a lot. Is that the situation? Mr. Lam, thank you, Mr. Tam, for your questions. As for the term consultants, maybe we haven't explained clearly. For a large part of public works, whether it's civil projects or what, we hire external consultants, engineers, architects, or surveyors who would, on a particular project, came up with some design. Say the Central Bypass. The entire design of that was commissioned to a consultancy firm. We told them what we wanted, and we made it clear to them what we wanted. And we also signed a contract with them to do the design for us. So after they designed a project for us, they will let us know what the costs involved. And this is a tendering project as well. As for the management of a project, say, look at the Central Winter Bypass project. You can see on the construction site, we have some resident site staff involving engineers, supervisors, and so forth, who would actually oversee the work of the contractor. So the consultancy includes the fees of hiring resident staff, and so which cover management and supervising fees. So for large projects on the whole, we will find a consultant to do the project design and monitoring.
And you mentioned about overspending. In relation to the individual projects, we don't have the information on hand. We may have to supply you the information afterwards as to what individual projects are involved and whether they are large projects. Well, I think Mr. Tam was not asking about specific figures. The 34 projects, are they large projects or what? We don't have the information on hand, and we'll supply it after the meeting. I have a supplementary. When it comes to design and management and supervision are outsourced. What role do civil servants play in the entire project? This is a valid question. If we engage outsiders, we have in-house professionals to look at the design. Say, for example, a certain item. Is the design most cost-effective? Will there be problems with the operation of the individual work? Say, for example, high maintenance costs. We can't simply rely on the consultant. We exchange views with them. We're given information, we look at them, we look at it, and if we have questions, we ask the consultant. Say, for example, whether there will be a high maintenance cost. We need professional views on them. Or maybe it's about the design. Will it meet the needs of the local area? We have professionals who engage in the local works to give us comments. Mr. Tam is concerned about the Central Wan Chai bypass. It will be discussed on the Friday meeting, Friday PWSC meeting. Next, Dr. Fernando Zhang. I want to ask about the estimate. Is there a standard practice? Other than the Development Bureau, there may be other government departments or statutory bodies who would engage public works. In the US, they have unified facilities criteria for the entire nation to base on when working out their project cost. Is there something similar in Hong Kong? Mr. Lam mentioned that there are requirements during the tender process, say, for example, performance. And what about outsourcing? Are there similar requirements? We know that when it comes to projects, works are outsourced to many layers. We have subcontractors, sub-subcontractors, sub-subcontractors. This will in turn affect the quality of the project. Are there any restrictions or any requirements? When the project cost estimate is worked out and you put in contingency fees and price adjustment, how thick is the cushion? Such information is available to tenderers, and I'm concerned that in an indirect way this will push up prices. I read from the press that out of the 22 projects in the third quarter, 4 of them overspent. One is the Liantang border control point, is an overspending of 27%. But this is catered for in the project contingency. But we're talking about an overspending of 27%, over $500 million. So isn't the cushion too thick in terms of project contingency? Tenderers will take that into account and take advantage of it. Just now the member asked if there is a professional criteria or standard when doing our assessment. This approach is adopted in overseas jurisdictions. There are 3 parts, like the one we have. And for each part, we have technical circular, say project contingency. It involves a professional risk assessment. There are many elements in a project. How do we assess the risks involved? There are guidelines issued. I believe that there are similar guidelines overseas. Whereas for other bodies, there may be some difference. Say at the MTRCL, they have their own approach. But whatever it is, it boils down to just a few things. The estimate on labor, material, plants, something like that. Risk assessment. There may be different standards in different countries. In Hong Kong, when we were working on this approach, we have taken reference from overseas countries. Outsourcing. The member was right. About 1 or 2 decades ago, we became aware of this problem. For various reasons, for projects in Hong Kong, they are subcontracted to many different layers. So we have a requirement in our tender that there should not be more than 2 levels of subcontracting. You give it to a contractor, and then the contractor can subcontract it to 1 or 2 subcontractors. And for certain projects involving a high safety issue, then we will restrict that even more. We require site resident professionals to regularly monitor and look at the proposals from contractors and subcontractors. Lastly, contingency. For large-scale projects, there are many contracts, and there is a total contingency. This system has been in place for many years. Well, when it comes to contractors taking that contingency in, well, there will be 6 or 7 contractors in the tender process, and they still have to compete with each other. So we are not too worried about this. For Liantang, BC, for the Liantang border control facilities, well, there are many contracts involved, some overspending, others underspending. Well, for contracts that have underspent, we will not specifically come to the LegCo to explain, and we will just put the surplus into the Treasury. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok. There are some projects not taken up by the government, but is under the government. Say, for example, Hospital Authority. Let's take West Kowloon Cultural District. The original estimate was a 1 lump sum, and they said that it was sufficient. But at that time, there was no comprehensive design in place. And WKCDA, the authority, was set up, and then they handed the project to the statutory body. Several months afterwards, they said that there was not enough money. The Sichu Center, they estimated that there will be an overspending of nearly 100%. And the administration had to intervene in the sense that they had to inject money by taking away a certain part of the project, that is the basement. So what is the role of the administration? What about supervision or regulation of the project estimate? They may engage a different consultant. When the administration consider injecting further funds, they may have a different methodology in the calculation. So how do you take into account the different standards or criteria used? When the statutory body proceed with the project, is the criteria used in working out the basic estimate the same as that of the administration? How do you ensure consistency? I will try to answer Mr. Ma's question. For different statutory bodies, we have MTRCL, we have WKCDA, we have the Hospital Authority and the Housing Authority. For each statutory body, there is a piece of legislation governing them, and it depends on the provisions. say a lump sum is given by the government, and that will be the maximum amount. Anything over and above that, will have to be taken up by the statutory body. The estimate proposal will have to be submitted to the government for vetting. And when it comes to the WKCD, I don't know exactly how it, what set of standard or legislation it follows. But their approach is similar to that of the administration. They engage a professional team. For WKCD, more from the buildings construction sector, say architects. They will work out the three parts: material, plant, labor cost, and then conduct a risk assessment, and then cater for movement of material prices. And I think wherever you are and in which department you are, the approach will be more or less the same. The relevant bureau or department will send representatives in the statutory body, and there will be discussions in the relevant authority. So I believe that there is a certain degree of monitoring. I know that there is some, but what about consistency? Do you require consistency, or are there different standards? I don't have the specific requirements under the various ordinances, but more or less the calculation will be similar when working out the estimate, the basic estimate, and the risk and the sharing of risk. Procurement may be different, and it depends on the individual body to see what is most appropriate for them. For us, we design it. So for certain projects, we design it, and then we will put out tender. For other projects, maybe we think it would be better for the consultant to come up with a design. And we have new risk sharing methods for some new projects. So it depends on the actual situation. Mr. Lin Leung. Just now, Mr. Kwong gave us a figure, saying that in the past decade, we have approved over 630 capital works projects. Only 34 projects have overspent. The figure seems low, but for the 34 projects, are they evenly distributed over the years, or are they mostly in recent years? Have you conducted any analysis on these 34 projects? What are the reasons for overspending? Is it because, like what Mr. Enoch Lam said, that metal prices have surged? If you take into account the basic estimate, well, there is one factor. It is the tender price index. If it's the same group of interested parties, I believe that there will be an impact on the tender price index. What about introduction of more competition? Will there be appropriate monitoring, looking into who puts in tender for certain projects, and are there any ways to encourage more people to put in tenders?
Our information shows that over the past decade, 34 projects had overspent. In 0304, there were 2 cases, 0405, 2 cases, 0506, 2 cases, and 0607, 2 cases, 0809, 7 cases, 09, 10, 7 cases. 11, 12, 3 cases. 1, 2, 1, 3, 4 cases. So basically, these projects were scattered. So in some years, there were as many as 7 projects that overspent. But you have to look at the context. How many projects were there in a year to make any comparisons? As for the reasons for the overspending, I don't have the information with me now. But according to my impression, there are some common reasons. In 1 year, we came to NATCO to apply for funding for a bunch of projects because of the surge in material prices, and the increases was beyond our original estimates. I think I remember the paper for those projects was approved in one go, and also in our provisions for price adjustment, for example, in the 0809, we foresaw the upcoming trends for the coming years. Indeed, there are some discrepancies in the figures projected. Chairman, I'm not trying to show a sign of disrespect, but I only have 5 minutes. I'd like to know. Just then, I know the Secretary wrote out some figures. I know the figures are not evenly distributed. From 08 to this year, there seems to be a concentration of overspending. Is it related to the mechanism or management of tenders? Because from 08 onwards, the number of overspent projects made up almost half of the 34 projects involved. That has exceeded the costs. As I said, you need to look at the overall number of projects in that period. From 03 to 08, the economy was in a doldrum. Therefore, there were few contracts awarded. But since 08, there were more projects, construction projects that went ahead. So we need to have a more detailed analysis first before I can give you more supplementary information. Yes, just then there are several questions on the 34 overspent projects. And just then Ellen Liang asked about the reasons, the distribution of the projects. I think you can list this information in your upcoming paper. About competition for projects, well, quite a number of, as for how many contractors bidded, we did monitor the situation. Lately, we've done a study, and we will roll out new measures soon. Firstly, we have a 3-tier system for to assess contractors. We want to have more Category C contractors who can be on our list. We would put contractors who are in a position to be eligible for Category C. We would monitor them more closely. We will consider relax the requirements further so that some contractors who have private experience or experience working for the housing authority, who may not have worked for the government before, to be put on the list, Category C list. And for the other categories of contractors, for example, they may be a ceiling on their kind of project that they can do. We can try to raise the ceiling as well for these contractors. And in a discussion with contractors, on the whole, they supported a healthy mechanism that can encourage more contractors to move up the ladder, and be able to take on more projects. And in doing so, we want to make way for more smaller contractors to be involved in our projects. Thank you. Next one is Ip Kok Him. Thank you, Chairman. We are concerned about the rising costs of construction projects. My personal view is that we have now got more projects, and therefore issues of manpower shortage or rising material prices become more acute. I'd like to ask here, just then, the Secretary, you said that you hope to let contractors with other experience to be eligible for bidding. Would you, or have you considered limiting the scale of a project, to develop up the scale of a project so that more small contractors can be eligible to bid? If that's the case, then the risk involved, because the larger a contract is, for example, the larger the contingency cost may be, but if you have smaller size projects, then the risks involved might be minimized. And you also will be better able to control the costs of a project. What you just said, I understand what you're talking about, but within Housing Authority, I did hear about a contractor, the situation of a contractor named Texan, who, because of, it was sold to another party later on. The name of that company wasn't that good, and that's why it ended up being sold off. So I know what you said I would consider, but let's be careful. But why not consider what I just suggested? Yes, thank you. Dividing up a project into various parts. We've done that in the past decade. I think actually we've been discussing this idea with the trade and with the Public Works Department. We will, for every project, we'll see what the amount involved is. If it's a large amount there, we will consider with the Public Works Department to divide it up into 2 or 3 projects. For example, if a road is very long, for this project, if we develop a road into various sections, that's possible. But can we divide it up into 3 or 4 segments? We need to be careful. There's a limit on the number of segments that can be involved in a bridge and so forth. We need to have some limit on that. But as for the building of school, there can be more room for maneuvers. We may say for each contract, the contractor can only be responsible for 1 or 2 buildings, so that more eligible contractors can bid for the same project. So I think our department is very happy to work in this direction. If you divide a project up into various parts, this could actually help us balance the costs. And we've done that as well already. Lately, we have carried out a study to see how we can do better in this regard. Yeah, I think that's very important. I agree with the example you just cited. For example, in the same district, several districts, in several schools may be under construction. And even if a contractor has won a project, he may subcontract the contract to other contractors as well. So I think you should work in that direction to attract more small contractors to bid. And if there is more competition, the bidding process will also come down. And also my other question is, recent years, the manpower shortage, I know you're concerned about that, of the bids submitted so far. Can manpower shortage be cited as a reason for delaying a project? And how likely is it that the would that cause delay? But are you worried that a delay of project, completion of project may lead to increased costs? Actually, for labor shortage, whether that could be a reasonable defense for delaying a project. For our contract so far, there's a clause that states clearly that if a project it states very clearly that a project cannot be delayed because of materials or manpower shortage. But lately, there's been a new clause for new contracts that remove this restriction. In other words, it's not that manpower is manpower shortage could be a reason, But we will look at the actual situation. For example, if a project, when the bid was submitted, the estimate for manpower did not tally with what actually happened, and if the kinds of workers needed are really in short supply, and if the workers required are important or are crucial to the vital stage of a project, then that's is important to know. So we would ask the contractor to provide relevant information to justify delaying a project without penalty. We could agree with extending the period of a contract, but as for the application for compensation, our contract states very clearly that if there's a reasonable excuse, then we would approve the project to be delayed for maybe 10 days. So that's the end for the first round. And now Frankie Yik, Chen Yun had also have raised their hands. So Emily Lau is going to ask questions later. But let's give Frankie Yik the chance first. Frankie Yik, please. Yes, Chairman, you're from the engineering sector. You feel free to give comments. As for the construction costs for government projects, normally are higher than private projects. That's my impression. You might want to correct me if I'm wrong. But if that's true, then is it because your clauses are more demanding, requiring the contractors to build in a lot of buffers? Or is it because the standards set for government contracts are too conservative? I heard before that, for example, student hostels, the pillars are required to be quite thick. So have you done any comparison with the cost in the private market? Have you looked into whether there can be adjustments made? And thirdly, my observation. You're talking about we're discussing estimates here. I think looking into the future, it's difficult to be precise in your estimates. Like what him has asked, we are now having more projects, and there's been a lingering shortage of manpower. And I expect the labor cost to continue to go up. So it's very difficult for you to make accurate estimates. And also, when it's possible, I think the contracts for construction projects should be separated so that the risks involved for the entire project can be lowered. Well, for private works, mainly they involve buildings. For large infrastructure projects, private sector involvement is less. I know that when a contractor assesses a government project, for some of the building of an office, the contractor will make reference to private offices, check the market rates. As for your observation on whether private projects are lower than government projects, well, I think some are higher than ours. The government does have some requirements that may not be followed by private contractors.
Construction safety and environmental protection. We currently are promoting something. In the past 2 decades, we specified in the tender document that if you put in place all construction safety, we will give you a sum. When we have discussions with developers, they have started considering this. The construction sector attach importance on safety for a project. If you put in place safety measures, then a sum will be given to you, but that will not be put into the project cost, because if they do, then this will drive down the cost put in other areas. Environmental protection. As you know that there are a lot of green buildings. We launch an initiative In 2009, for buildings with over 10,000 square meters, we hope that they will get the gold standard. When developers build offices or hotels, they will strive for gold or platinum. And of course, this will drive up project cost. But when it comes to environmental protection or green construction, operation cost in the future will be kept low. The administration will take the lead to set an example. Your observation is right. We are kept on our toes when we try to work out material prices. We import all our material, some from the mainland, some from Southeast Asia. We monitor the material prices. They seem to be quite stable. We'll continue to liaise with the relevant departments to improve our monitoring. Labor cost. What we can do is to work with the CIC, the Construction Industry Council, to encourage youngsters to join. We see that there are workers under 30 years old who are now working. Well, I want to say that because you have poached workers from other sectors, and I think that is the case in every sector. Ms. Chen Yunhan. Thank you. I remember last year in a PWSC meeting, I've talked about it. It seems that for a lot of projects, you see the work commence, but you never see it completed. It takes years. Mr. Chan Kam-lam, the ex-chairman, said that there would be a special meeting on this, but it was put to the back burner. And I think it has become the practice instead of an exception. Even for small-scale projects, it will drag on for many years. Is that a problem with management? Well, if it is aborted, we see. But work drags on. We see in areas where there are a lot of people, it's very obvious. Say, for example, the Sha Tin Central Line. It goes through Kowloon East. And people actually see the work going on forever. What can you do about the delay? And now, I'm warning the government. We have a lot of projects being commenced. Construction workers welcome work, but when there are too many projects going on in the same time, it'll be difficult for them as well. I remember back in a time when the government was building a lot of buildings. We had jerry building, we had shop pile buildings, we had projects that was aborted. Today, it may not be building of residential flats, but still, the number of projects going on at the same time is excessive. How can you ensure quality? I know that the current government is under pressure because the previous one did not do anything. And they're talking about 48,000 units a year. So what preparations do you have? You are from the Development Bureau. I was in the Select Committee looking into short piles. They had so many tricks. A dodgy measuring tape and work going on in the middle of the night. How can the government ensure that all projects are done to specifications and that everything is safe and of high quality? So first, time management. 2, quality. Well, we're here to talk about estimate. Mr. Lam, I think, this is the appropriate platform. Well, delay of projects will affect the cost. there is a clear provision in the contract that for every day delay, there is a sum to be paid. We don't call it a penalty. When we discuss with contractors, they are also very concerned with the work schedule. For large-scale projects, there may be different sections. For each segment, if there is a delay, they will have to pay a sum for every day delayed, maybe $10,000 a day or $100,000 a day. I don't know whether you're talking about digging up of roads. Many. Mr. Lam? Well, there is a project near my home. They said that it will be completed a year, but it takes longer than a year and there's always a delay. So I do think that the estimated completion date is meaningless. Because in the end, it's always delayed. I agree that, about a decade ago for road digging, there is an estimated completion date, and if there is a delay, we will inform the public. And if you talk about digging up of roads or delay of certain projects, I'm talking about a lot of such delay. I believe that the supervisors, Mr. Lam, please give us an information paper. How many of such projects are there? Because they affect people's business and they affect the road. We've made it clear in the contract about the completion date, and they are also very concerned about the work schedule as well. From time to time, our supervisors will monitor the progress, and if it's slow, then we will suggest increasing manpower. And sometimes the potential delay was caught up, and sometimes it's delayed because of, say, a rainy season. So there are two types. If there are excessive rainy days, and we will give them a leeway. But the second type is about, say, for example, lack of worker or machinery. They will have to pay the daily sum. Quality. Subcontracting is a factor that may affect quality, and we have forbidden more than 2 levels of subcontracting, and this has a positive impact on quality. The former CS4A, Mr. Tang, has done something. Well, but it was rejected by the CIC. Mr. Ronald Akoli was in the meeting. The problem was not resolved, but when there are so many projects, for various reasons, say labor cost, material cost, in the end, contractors have to resort to jerry building. So how much supervision have you done? Some of the measures are not effectively implemented because it is out of the reach of the government. When there are so many projects, how can you ensure that quality is met? We're trying to change the culture in the construction sector by changing the procurement method. In the past, we only play the role of supervision, and as a result, there are opportunities for contractors to jerry bill. And we're now trying out new procurement methods. We have a team. It's a partnership. Several years ago in Sai Kung, Wan Fuk Road, there is a drainage work. We tried the contract partnership approach. It was effective. We have underspent and we have saved several months in the construction period. This method was in place for over 10 years in the UK, and it was put into practice in many different places as well. Well, when it comes to jerry building, well, there may be difficulties encountered by the contractor, and we would like to talk to the contractors for them to tell us what difficulties they have encountered. We have adopted this new approach. We hope that this new culture will foster, and we can exchange and communicate more. We are not just talking about employers, architect, engineer. We will also like to engage subcontractors as well. Apart from all the different matters, among different matters, one of them is construction safety. We believe that would have a positive impact on quality. We have Emily Lau in the second round. Who else? Ms. Chan? We have less than 20 minutes. Only 2 members in the second round. 5 minutes each. Ms. Lau? Thank you. The delay. Well, the Deputy Secretary said today we're talking about project estimate, but it's related. You told us that out of the 600 projects, about 30 of them overspent. Tell us how many projects result in a delay. It's the impression of the public that work progress is slow. So compared to the past, compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, how long in general did it take for a project to complete? And what about now? Well, you may tell us that we have to consult the district nowadays, and I would like to remind the administration not to put the blame on the electrical, because when something cannot be done, they will say that the electrical got in the way. But very often when you come to us, we ask you to expedite it. Well, perhaps it's not you, but some of you would like to point the fingers at us. So tell us, are there any difficulties that you have encountered in the past 10 years or so? About manpower shortage, the DS has spoken a lot on this. And you said that if for new contracts, you will allow a delay if this is the reason. So can you tell us, with this new approach, how many contractors have told you that they would like to have an extension because there is manpower shortage? And do you have any figures? And about the amount of increase cost as a result of manpower shortage? DS. A new provision in contract that an extension may be allowed if there is manpower shortage. We're considering it. We have yet to sign these new contracts, so I don't have the information to give you. We'll see, starting from next year, whether there is any contractors who apply for an extension because of manpower shortage. In 2010, we saw that there would be a manpower shortage, and we did something. And we see that we have workers under the age of 35 joining the construction industry. Of course, we have to give time to them to learn what they need to learn before they actually work in a construction site. Then our new measures involve not just training workers in an institute. We encourage contractors to recruit workers and teach them at the site. We try different ways to encourage youngsters to join the trade.
So there are 34 projects that overspent. Well, how about other data? Well, he said that he will provide us with information later on. Chairman, he said that in the new contracts, they are allowed. But why did you make that decision? Well, it's because Is it because you feel that you had to include this new provision? Well, we think that in the old contracts, there's a clause stating that machinery shortage costs or salaries cannot be used as a reason for project delay. But no, it's not that we will grant delay when there's a shortage. But we just want to review the policy. We've just reviewed the policy of not granting delay just because of making it possible for project delay because of shortages. We're just moving ahead with times. Well, I think now, well, I know at least. Do you have information of the situation of the industry? Well, as far as I can remember, I think for stakeholders in the industry, they have communicated with us, and we did discuss with contractors the new arrangement. Besides this measure, we have also explored with the industry various ways to tackle the issue of shortages. Okay, next one, second round, Chen Yunhan. Thank you, Chairman. I heard just then from Mr. Lam that, say, some projects in Cyclone, the government actually monitored the budget with together with developers. Would you adopt this approach for other projects as well? Well, we are actually piloting this scheme. We need to be cautious. This new culture cannot be launched overnight. Over the past few years, we have tried this approach with civil engineering and architectural services departments, and the effect has been quite good. Well, quite good because the new policy allows the government to work together with developers and tackle difficulties together. Our thinking now is that if the review of this policy is good, then we would try to extend this policy more widely. We'll see whether it's necessary to introduce this culture. But we do hope that if the results are good, we'll try to adopt it more widely. But can you apply this measure to the housing development projects? Well, we did discuss that with the housing department, and they do agree with the spirit of the measure. They may not use it totally, but well, I was saying that, for the government, my observation is that housing authority is even difficult for the housing society to actually have control of some housing projects. I'm worried. Well, of course, risk management is necessary. We've got so many projects. We need to make sure that the buildings are of good quality. I don't know whether the chairman is aware of this. Some people in the construction industry have expressed concern about quality of buildings. So I think the Development Bureau had to collaborate with try to collaborate with the building the departments responsible for the building of public housing units. I don't want to have to open a select committee to look into issues again in the future. Well, we have communicated or shared experiences with colleagues in the housing department. We've also this procurement method of having collaborative partners, and we expect the housing department to adopt a similar clause. They may not adopt it in whole, but I'm sure that the Transport and Housing Bureau is also concerned about the quality of various building projects. We have shared experiences with them. Chairman, I think what I've heard from people in the industry, their biggest worry is that we don't want to see a repeat of the situation in 1995, 1996, when a lot of building projects were started, but there were not enough support for them. So the government needs to do some assessment of our capabilities. We need to be practical. We have to have scientific management of the projects to ensure quality. Mr. Lam, I think you do. It's worth. I think the situation now is very similar to the building boom in 1994-95. I think you should bring this issue back to your discussions with the Transport and Housing Bureau. Yes, we will continue to see how we can move forward. Lately, we have asked contractors, bidders to let us know some innovative ways to increase productivity, for example, by using machinery that can does away with the need for extra workers. We may also introduce clauses asking the bidders to reduce the capital costs. So these are new measures we've adopted after consultation with the industry, and we have rolled them out gradually. We have been actually launched other measures in accordance with the needs. Okay, I think Ms. Chen Yun Han is very concerned about the quality of public housing units. Yes, short piles actually were what happened in public housing. But now we've got so many more other infrastructure projects. We need to be concerned with quality. Okay, because of time limit, Abraham Shack has asked to speak, speaking for the first time. So 5 minutes for you. We have to draw a line now because we're almost 10:30. So only 7-8 minutes left. Abraham Shack, please. Yes, I agree with Ms. Chen Yun Han that you need to have a good review to avoid any problems in the future. I also like to ask you, of course it's good to have new measures, as you mentioned, but during your how much communications have you had with the industry? And what does the industry think of the new measures? Do they accept them? Why do they accept them if yes? And if not, have they given you any alternatives? And have you not accepted any of their suggestions? Yes. Whenever there are new policies in place in relation to construction safety or procurement, we would discuss with business associations, societies, or relevant organizations in the construction field. Our experience shows that when we first submitted a paper and hold briefings for them, they would have suggestions, of course, and we may amend our policies on the basis of their comments. And there are also situations when we put some measures on hold because of the reactions. And there are also times, when there are opposing views, and we'll try to strike a balance and consider we'll try to strike a balance. And our measures actually, all the measures we introduced were based on gauging the reactions of the industry. So that's the same procedure or process applied to the measures I just suggested. Okay, so have you discussed them with EMCA, with the Construction Industry Council? Do they support you? The three major trade organizations in the field, have they accepted your measures? What are the measures or suggestions that they have not accepted? Or do you just expect them to follow what you have proposed? I'd just like to hear from you what the reactions are to your new measures. Well, over the past few years, I've been working at the Development Bureau for the construction industry. They're pretty united for our changes to laws in the future. In recent days, whenever we launch a major policy, we would actually prepare a paper and consult the major trade organizations, like the one you just suggested, the main ones. And we are also in contact with people in charge of the organizations. We often meet several times a month. I think we will understand that, they made it very clear to us that they have views on this or that. And they tell us what their worries are. As I said, for some strong oppositions, if they have strong views on some issues, we might put the measures involved on hold. Chairman, the large trade organizations will give you views, and their views are very important. If you ignore the views, then like what Ms. Chen Yuhan just said, problems could occur. So I'd like you to give us a paper listing the reactions and the opposing views of these major trade organizations to your new policies. And also now with your new measures now, please list out the differences between the old and new measures, how they affect individual projects. I want to see a comparison. Yes, you talk about the new procurement method. Yes, for the new procurement method, the collaboration with the developers approach, we can actually provide information in the paper. Actually, some developers consider actually applying the new measures to their not just contractors but subcontractors. So I'm executive director of a company in the construction industry, so I'm stating you the actual situation. I'm speaking as a representative. I'm speaking on behalf of the industry here. Chairman. Okay. Emily Lau. Yes, I agree with their submission to submit papers to us. I think if for other projects besides cyclone project that use the new method, please name them in your paper as well. Yes. So as for this contractual partners policy, we will ask the Bureau to give us the details of the policy in a paper. And the paper should list out the implementation of the policy and how it's different from the practice in the past. It's best to have examples, and the paper should also list the views of the industry to the new policy. Okay? So I think we've got 2 minutes left. So as for the today's meeting on estimation of project costs, I think we've come to the end. There's no other item on the agenda. I think it's very good to have a briefing today. It's a very good idea because it lays some foundation for the works of our PWSC. In the future, when we have government papers put before us on project costs, it will help with our assessment of the papers in the days or months ahead. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 27. Yes, I think for government projects in the future, I would suggest that they can be divided up into smaller parts. Yeah, we discussed it earlier. Yes, we mentioned this already. The next meeting is scheduled for November 27, 8:30 in the morning. So please show up on time. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.